Greetings, programs, and welcome to the Awesome Friday podcast. My name is Matthew, and with me today is Simon, and we're going to talk about some movies. But before we do that, how are you today, Simon?
Hello. I'm fine. Halloween candy sugar apocalypse. I don't need to recap all that. All our Patreon listeners have already heard this, but basically it's the most wonderful time of the week where someone with no portion control and works from home is surrounded by chocolates. It's great. How are
And
you?
so that's a weekly occurrence? You said it was the best time of the week. So I'm assuming that just like every weekend someone drops chocolate in your
Yeah,
lap.
that would be wonderful, wouldn't it? It's the best time of the week if a week were a year.
Right.
I
Of
know
course.
we're getting to when the clocks changed. The clocks changed this morning, so now it's going to be dark by 3 o'clock. I've given up alcohol for a while. I haven't drunk anything since the beginning of October, so I've got to have some vices left. I've got to have something that is not like just normal. So I'm replacing it with Halloween candy, which is always nice. Did you go trick or treating in your neighborhood?
We sure didn't. We did nothing of the sort in our tiny apartment building. But you know, we're adults. It's fine. We're adults with no kids. There's no kids in our building, which is a purposeful choice, apparently. Um, so yeah, we didn't. We stayed in. We watched horror movies. I've been doing this thing lately where I keep track of everything that I watch on. So I make a list every month on Letterboxd where I just add things that I've seen for the first time in that month. And October was the busiest one of those lists so far this year, and it is a lot of horror movies. We watched a lot of horror movies, and in particular, I think I've been going out of my way to see things I haven't seen before. So there's been a lot of horror movies, which helps because my wife is a huge, as you know, a huge horror movie buff.
Yeah, but
And so
I also think your wife is exactly the kind of person who'd like to get dressed up in a cute, scary costume and go door to door and collect like gummies from people. I feel like that's her jam.
I mean, yeah, maybe if honestly, if we'd like come over to hang out with you guys, we probably would have had a great time. But we didn't do that. So
But anytime you want, that's fine.
yeah.
I know we need to move forward, but just while we're talking about amazing horror movies, can I just say how excited I am that the sequel to It Follows has been announced, called They Follow. Same director, same cast. Feed it into my veins, like rub it into my gums. Show me the way to that theater.
I'm going to make the same joke I made on Twitter, which is that I'm pleased they made a follow-up.
Jesus Christ. Are you sure you don't have kids?
Come on, it's just sitting there waiting. Like, yeah, it's a whole. It's a. It's a great film, and I'm excited to see what they do.
I'm glad, but kind of disappointed they didn't go for the really obvious, cheesy title. Like, It Still Follows, or It Follows Again.
Yeah. Or It Is Following.
Yeah, that would be the style, wouldn't it? But
real Dwight Schrute, It Is Your Birthday vibes. I'd be down for that, actually.
I sent that to someone this week. I feel like a total fake Office fan because I always send that to anyone who's got a birthday, and I have no idea. I've never even seen that episode. I'm sure it's hilarious.
It is. It's really good. It's in. I would say that that episode is in like their peak of being good. It's in that era. But I have lots of opinions about The Office because I've seen it so many goddamn times. I say that like I'm angry, but I'm not. I love that show, and like it's like a warm blanket. That's why we keep rewatching it in our house. It's so easy to put on and just enjoy.
Who's your Brad Pitt casting replacement for The Office?
Brad Pitt could not replace anyone in The Office.
Oh, he could do the guy from The Hangover pretty well. What's his name? Ed
Holmes.
Ed Holmes. He could do Ed Holmes. That part.
He probably could, but here's my opinion about that character. So that character's name is Andy, and he's written for a large swath of it to be this sort of like lovable idiot, but he's actually a huge asshole the whole time. And it's definitely worse at the very beginning of his appearances, which is about season 3, and the very end, like seasons 8 and particularly season 9. But he's a huge asshole, and I don't really like him most of the time. He's either an idiot or an asshole, and there's no like balance between those two things. I think he's one of
But,
their weakest characters.
oh, so you don't like him? You'd actually rather he wasn't in the episodes.
I think if they could find a balance between him being an idiot or a jerk, it
Mm-hmm.
would be better. I think one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that the original Office does legitimately better. So I do think the American Office is better, like just for clarity's sake. But I think one of the things that the British Office does better is that it has a more
It's funnier.
each character is more well defined. The American Office has a couple of characters who their characterization changes drastically from time to
Mm-hmm.
time, like season to season, and I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit weaker in that regard. But ultimately, I do think it's a better show. So
Interesting.
yeah,
It's a
but
very different
also
show. I think once you get past the first season, it becomes increasingly difficult to compare them because it riffs off in its own direction in season 2 successfully. I might add. I think for the style of North American humor, I think it was a very good idea to stop trying to be British
I
because
mean,
we do.
my favorite like behind the scenes thing about that show is that the first season is not very good because it's basically a shot for shot remake almost of the
Mhm,
first season of the British Office. And one of the choices that the showrunners made behind the scenes in between seasons 1 and 2 was just that everyone needs to be 10% nicer to Michael.
mhm,
And I think that really like informs the rest of the show, like in that, and he stops being such a piece of shit and turns into a sort of more bumbling Homer Simpson lovable idiot type character.
mhm.
And I think that it works a lot better.
Yeah,
I think that
it
the British
does.
Office is very successful, but there's only so far you can go with a horrible misanthrope as your main character.
I mean, that's why we only had 2 seasons, 2 very short seasons of The
Yeah.
Office, and that was the perfect length for David Brent and that hellhole that unfortunately most of us have worked in. But no, it was the evolution from season 1 to 2 of The Office. I think is a perfect example of why you need a writing team, a good writing team, who can look at something and pick apart very specifically what is working and what needs to be adjusted and have that freedom and creative vision to do that because it works like gangbusters. Even though it becomes its own a different show, it's a very, very good show.
Yeah, and it's also very clearly a very collaborative show, and lots of people have come out of it, like BJ Novak and Mindy Kaling, who are supporting players through the entire run of the show, um, are also heavily involved in the production and writing.
Yeah.
Lots of them directed episodes, and a lot of the other behind the scenes people, like people don't really realize that Paul Feig, who's a big deal movie director now,
Mm.
like did cut his teeth directing stuff like The Office.
And it's edited to an it like perfection, an inch of its life. This is something we're going to talk about later today. When you've got improv comedy troupe, you need an editing team who know exactly when to end that joke and move on. And what I find really interesting is that for whatever reason, my Instagram is flooded with accounts with like office outtakes and extended scenes and things, and they're all really, really flabby. And they're all like, oh, I understand this is an excellent education as to why editing is important.
Yeah.
And with that style of humor, you've got to be absolutely on top of the lines at work and the things that have ended and when you need to move on. And The Office does that brilliantly, I think.
Yeah, the other interesting thing, and I don't remember where I heard this, I heard it a number of years ago, but another really interesting thing, I think, is that although they were very on the ball in terms of editing and keeping things very tight, they also considered all of that stuff. Like if it was a scene that ran long and they cut part of it, they still considered the cut part of it to be like canon for the characters to like work with. So
Mm,
even if there's something that we didn't see, they considered it just being like the characters' exterior lives from the show. I thought that was a really interesting
mm,
choice as well.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah. But I could do a whole podcast about The Office. Like we could do an episode. We could do an episode by episode of the podcast, a podcast about The Office if you wanted to.
Sure.
I would be down for that. Yeah, what I
Yeah,
mean,
we definitely have to get your wife in on that then.
yeah, definitely. Well, so here's a question. So I've been keeping these lists. So I saw what 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 28 new things in October.
Jesus
Um,
Christ. Oh
28
my God.
things for the first time in October. Um,
How?
oh, I don't have children.
Oh my God.
What what was the what was the best new thing
Oh,
you saw in October, whether we talked about it or not?
like film?
Yeah, or TV
Uh,
or whatever. Just what's a great thing you saw
oh,
for the first time? Doesn't have to
uh,
be new, just new to you in October.
oh. So I don't watch that much TV. I tend to watch whatever my wife puts on. So I was entirely surprised at how good the David Beckham documentary is on Netflix.
Hmm,
And I
I
don't know
haven't
if
seen
you've
it.
seen it yet. So I've been playing a lot of Factorio on my Switch. So when the kids go to bed, I'm like to my wife, put whatever you want on. I'm going to sit next to you and play this. I'm going to snuggle in. You put whatever you want. I can do both. And so she, as you probably well know, she likes David Beckham a lot, like a lot, and she's very excited about this documentary. But I don't really like documentaries. They don't really do much for me. I don't like speaking heads. I don't like nostalgia bait documentaries where people talk about things from the 90s. I really dislike most documentaries, really. And I also don't really have the kind of focus or interest to watch 4 hour long episodes about David Beckham, but it's brilliantly made. It's a really good documentary. It does have talking heads, but everything is shot really interestingly. The You also hear the voices of the filmmakers too, and they have managed to get tons of really interesting people, like very famous through the ages people, and are asking them really interesting talking points, and have edited together brilliantly. And it goes through so many things I kind of forgotten about, being a much younger when David Beckham was in his ascendancy, and when he got sent off and in the World Cups, and when he's like was the best player on the planet for a long time, and hearing him talk about that and hearing his very human approach to telling a story about himself, because he's never been a media boy. Like one of the one of the things about Beckham when he was very, very famous is that he didn't really have that media training to speak like a superstar. He's always just been a kid, and he still speaks from his heart, and he speaks very openly and honestly. And I really vibed with that, and I watched all 4 episodes of that, and it was fantastic. It was really good, really worthwhile. So
I
recommended.
would
Oh,
say I would say part of David Beckham's problem in terms of maybe being a media presence is just that he doesn't have the voice for it because it's about 2 octaves higher than you expect it to be at any given point.
so one of the great joys in the universe is that it's always in balance. And so you've
Mm.
got a man who looks like a Greek god who stopped my wife mid sentence on our honeymoon in San Francisco because the Cheesecake Factory had a roof to ground Calvin Klein advert with David Beckham in his underwear. And she stopped mid sentence with this guttural noise that really hasn't changed over thousands of years of evolution. And she uh, she gave birth to my second kid the morning after watching a David Beckham documentary. So I think he's been very important in our lives. And So yes, the universe is in balance because he looks like a god and sounds like a schoolboy. So
Yeah,
he's proof for sure.
yeah. He's an interesting case, and I'm glad I did get to see him play one time when he was playing. Admittedly, when he was playing for the Galaxy, the LA Galaxy, which he also I think still co-owns. When they
Mm-hmm,
came to town to play the Whitecaps, but I'm glad I got to see him
mm-hmm,
play because even though he was clearly, maybe slightly past his prime, he was still running circles around,
mm-hmm.
as I imagine he still does today, run in
Yes,
circles around most people.
absolutely.
Like I'm not trying to make any implications about the skill level or quality level of MLS. I think, but I'm saying that like David
No, you
Beckham is
can.
just that good. Like,
He like best in the world for vision, and also like placing a ball on
mm-hmm,
a specific point in the net. Like, I've never seen anyone else take free kicks like him.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yep. Well, for me, of all the things I watched, I want to say that like the one that's maybe surprised me the most, and I don't know why it shouldn't, but I watched John Carpenter's 1994 film In the Mouth of Madness, and that is a
Oh.
really great film, uh,
Mm-hmm.
with a really wonderful Sam Neill, same time frame as like Jurassic Park, and
Mm-hmm.
like super meta commentary that feels maybe more relevant today than it did in 1994, which
Hmm.
I always sort of appreciate. I don't know if you've seen this movie,
I
but
have not. No. Yeah.
so basically, there's a horror writer named Sutter Kane who has
Mm-hmm.
disappeared, and the world is going fucking crazy, and he's disappeared. And Sam Neill plays an insurance adjuster, investigator called John Trent, who's sent to like find Sutter Kane. And what he realizes is that over through the course of the movie, he goes to this town where the Sutter Kane supposedly is, but the town isn't a real town. It's the town that Sutter Kane writes about in his books. And
Huh.
it comes out that like the things that Sutter Kane puts in his books become real.
This is
Um,
very, very Stephen King of him.
yeah, and it's I won't spoil exactly how or why, but let me just say that like the reasons why and the explanations thereof, right down to the very last. The last scene is very famous. It's a disheveled Sam Neill in a cinema laughing at the screen, but the reason why he's laughing is so perfect, um, and the way the whole thing plays out and what it's trying to say about the world is so
Mm.
interesting. And again, maybe more relevant than it was in 1994. And I don't want to spoil
Mm.
it for anyone who hasn't seen it, so I'm not going to. But you should definitely go. You should definitely find this movie and watch it. It was on the Criterion Channel when I watched it. I'm sure it's available other places, and
Hmm.
you should seek it out.
Wicked. Yeah, I will. I will add that to the list too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things on your list so far.
Yes,
So,
there really is.
yeah,
Master and Commander being at the top of it for God, 10 years now, maybe.
yeah. Although having recently discovered on our bonus episode that you've never seen Casablanca, maybe
Come on, man.
maybe Master and Commander could be number two
Uh,
for the time being.
I'm going to be ejected from film committees over my fake film status by not having seen Casablanca or Seven Samurai or
I
countless
mean,
other big movies.
not if you watch them.
Quickly. Uh, Remember, I watch them all at the same time. There's bound to be some mushroom related event where you put on two movies at the same time and they synchronize, like you could do with Pink
we'll
Floyd and
just
The Wizard of Oz.
let's get you an attachment for your computer chair, for your desk chair that like reaches around the front and holds your eyeballs open. You know, Clockwork Orange style.
Haven't seen Clockwork Orange either, but okay.
I mean, that's not great, but it's less of a problem than
I don't
Casablanca.
want to watch. I just don't want to watch Clockwork Orange. I know what it's about. I know too much about it. We have a very good friend of ours has a chart of his remaining weeks on Earth, and he uses that to determine if he watches a film or not, because he's worked out realistically how many more films he can watch in his life, and does he want this film to be one of those, that finite number, which I think is terrifying. But I'm more passively like, I want to watch movies to feel like nice things. I don't want to watch Kubrick's film about horrific gang rape and mind control and all kinds of things.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I get that. I really respect that list he has. Uh, in that I like that it assigns value to the content that the capital C
Yeah.
content that he is consuming,
Mm-hmm.
um, in a way that similarly, this is why a number of years ago, you know, when I was young and broke, I used to pirate stuff all the time, and at a certain point, I stopped. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason I stopped was that having everything available for free made it feel less impactful. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Having to make
Definitely.
choices about what I wanted to see in terms of my time and resources definitely
Mm-hmm.
made it gave weight to the stuff I was watching in a way that I didn't actually really expect.
Yeah.
I mean, I expected it, but not to the level that it did. So that's why I don't generally pirate stuff anymore.
I have the exact same problem with Xbox Game Pass, and I did on PS Plus before I let it lapse. And my Game Pass runs out in April, and I'm going to let that lapse because none of those games on there have any intrinsic value to me because they're just I can try 10 minutes and just let it go. And even there's a game that's just come out called Jusant, which is fantastic, but I think I would love it more if I bought it because it would have a bit more of a something I've chosen to spend my money on, if that makes stupid sense. But Game Pass is such a library of stuff, and you don't have to. You just pay an amount, and you can do as much or as little as you want, which is kind of my dream when I was young. And it turns out it's not what I want at all. But hey,
Yeah,
that's a very different conversation.
it's interesting actually, and I think it's gonna. This might come up next week because one of the movies we're going to talk about next week is a Netflix release, which you will have seen um, on Netflix, but I had the opportunity to see in a cinema, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
like, as is the case with a prior Netflix release, maybe you've heard of it, called The Irishman. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I liked a lot more than a lot of people I know, and I think it had a lot to do with the way I saw it, which was in a cinema. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like, not that, I mean, no, I'm just going to say that I feel like being on Netflix does devalue film a
Mm-hmm.
little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think it does it.
Totally agree.
It does that less to TV shows, but it does do it
Mm-hmm.
to some extent to both of them. I think it devalues them somewhat.
Yep.
That's a longer discussion with more nuance that I'm willing to put in right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and so on that bombshell, let's move on and talk about some current movies. Um, we're going to talk about two movies as we usually do today. Before we do, just the quick housekeeping version of the spiel. In that, if you like the show, if you like our discussions, if you like all this stuff that we do, you can support us with a like, a subscribe, a review, a share, or
Hit that button.
Patreon subscription. All these things are available to you, and all of them are in the show notes. We are on basically every major platform, podcasting platform, and Patreon and Ko-fi. And any of those things you want to do would be very well received, and we'd be very grateful.
Yeah.
Um, and if you want to find us, there's too many socials today, so you can find us in the show notes. You'll find my homepage and Simon's homepage, and you can follow us via those things.
Yes, you can.
Anyway, let's move on. We're going to talk about two movies, both of which are Disney movies, technically, this week. And we're going to talk about the one I'm going to guess. I'm just going to guess right now. We haven't talked at length about either of them ahead of time, but I'm going to guess that the first one we're going to talk about is the one that we both liked better.
I think that's fair to say
I'm going to guess.
yes.
But we're going to talk about it first because it's older, and that movie is A Haunting in Venice, which is the latest of the Kenneth Branagh Hercule Poirot mystery films, which I quite like. I've liked all of them. I don't know if I'm in the minority exactly, but I know a lot of people view them as being fairly uneven. But this one sees a retired Hercule Poirot in post-war Venice, post-World War II Venice, who is living a quiet life, who's pulled into a case. He's taken to a Halloween party, and at that party, murder most foul occurs, and he is left to solve the case. It is a locked house with a cast of thousands, all of whom are at least moderately famous, including recent Academy Award winner Michelle Yeoh, Kelly Riley, Jamie Dornan, Tina
Tina
Fey
Fey.
is probably the most important one because she is pretty great. Um, and I don't know what to say, man. Like, I really like this movie. I didn't like it as much as Murder on the Orient Express, but I think I might be biased there because that is pretty much my favorite Agatha Christie story. Um, and it's also maybe not fair to Death on the Nile because Death on the Nile has a real problem with problematic people who are super distracting
Oh
because they're in the movie.
yeah.
There's like four of them. There's at least three,
Yeah.
but I think four of them in that movie who are just turned out to be garbage human beings,
Yeah.
and it's very distracting. Um, but in A Haunting in Venice, it takes place in this beautiful palazzo. Um, Basically, everyone in it is good, not the least of which is Tina Fey, who's putting on this mid-Atlantic accent that sounds like it should just be her natural accent. Like,
Oh my god,
I don't
amazing.
know how to explain it, but like if you hear Tina Fey speaking with a mid-Atlantic accent, you'd be remiss for thinking she was the only human alive that was her natural accent ever.
Mhm.
It fits her so well, and she's also just actually quite good in the movie as well. Like not just her accent, but she is really good as this friend who drags Poirot into the situation and gets him caught up in the mystery. And is she involved or isn't she? Um, and I mean, it's hard to talk about. I don't want to spoil the mystery, even though this film is now on Disney Plus here in Canada and just available to watch. It is a it is the Haunting in Venice is not a title, I don't think, of an actual Christie story, but it is an adaptation of a Christie, I think, two different Christie stories.
Oh really?
And
I didn't know that.
yeah, one's called The Halloween Party, and the other one I
Mhm.
can't remember what the. I think it actually is just a Halloween party, is what it's called, The Halloween Party,
Right.
which makes sense because it takes place during a Halloween party. But it also makes a lot of interesting choices. The cinematography is really interesting and creative. There's a whole middle stretch of this film where Poirot is maybe being haunted, and so the camera angle choices and lens choices are all super interesting and really heighten what he's going through and why he's going through it. Um, and I don't know, man. I just love these films where it's a cast of a constellation of stars talking in fun accents, solving a mystery. It's a genre that I'm into, and I think that I know that Kenneth Branagh's Poirot is a little bit over the top, but I kind of love that about him. And if anything, I was disappointed that the mustache was maybe dialed back a little bit in this one and couldn't be twirled quite so effectively. Um, I don't know. I feel like I'm just rambling at this point. What did you think of A Haunting in Venice, Simon?
So okay, I didn't. Uh, I have not enjoyed his Agatha Christie movies. I'm not sure Kenneth Branagh's a very good director. Or actually, I should clarify that. I don't think he's a very consistent director. But one thing he does here is his cinematography, his visuals of his direction are always exceptional. Even with something like Thor, which he's completely the wrong director for Thor, in my opinion. Um, and his Hamlet, which is not my favorite depiction of Hamlet as a character, but is absolutely luscious to look at. It's just gorgeous. And the previous two movies, I've only watched part of both of them because I bounced off them pretty hard, but they both looked beautiful, were designed beautifully. So I think he's a very, very visually interesting director. The problem with Branagh is that he can be quite hammy sometimes, like a little over the top generally. Except sometimes he really isn't. Like if you look at him in Tenet, where he's very very underplayed, he can do subtle, he can do low grade, but his hamminess sometimes really comes out in his direction as well. So I wasn't expecting to like this at all, and honestly, I thought it was pretty great. I actually really, really liked it a lot. I was fascinated by his offset framing of the characters when they were a shot reverse shot, which you get so used to the faces sort of being 3/4 of the way across, 3/4 of the way up, and he did, as you mentioned, a number of very, very strange angles and almost fisheye lenses to add lots and lots and lots of shadow to the background and lots of dead space to around the faces, and also the faces. The front of the face is really, really close to the edge of the frame, so the back of their
Mm-hmm.
head had lots of space behind them, and for the majority of the film, everything is shot just off a little bit intentionally, and I thought that was honestly masterpiece of cinematography. And his vision for that to capture the feeling that something is off in that house. He's clearly thought, well, how can I do that through filmmaking as well? How can I capture that through filmmaking? And so he's actually used our expectations of watching films and then manipulated them to make things feel a bit off until it all resolves at the end. I thought that was amazing, actually, and the design is amazing, and um, it's quite as simple as murder mysteries go. It was quite straightforward and quite simple. Like you didn't have the glass onion layers or the more modern whodunits are often a bit more layered and a bit more complex. It was quite when he got it and he explained exactly what was going on. It kind of all fit together really, really well, which is
Mm-hmm.
quite satisfying as an audience actually, because sometimes I really hate this feeling that we had no chance of working out what was going on because there's so much we didn't know, which can happen in Ryan Johnson's Whodunits. But it was really logical how it all fit together, and very very satisfying in the reveal. But he's just having a great time in this film, and there's one moment where, because the whole thing is that he's, for whatever reason, I haven't seen the last one, for whatever reason he's kind of rejected his uh, his famous reputation as being this crime solver. And his friend, played by Tina Fey, an author called Ariadne Oliver, is kind of who's written about him or about his exploits, is trying to encourage him to get back on the horse, and saying, she keeps seeing the old Hercule Poirot come back. And there's one point where he locks all the doors after the first dead person is discovered. He locks all the doors. He keeps everyone trapped in this beautiful Italian structure. And he says, "Tell the police Hercule Poirot is on the case." And he doesn't say it normally. He
Yeah,
doesn't say, tell the police Hercule Poirot is on the case, as David Suchet would have done. And David Suchet is probably the most famous Poirot, I'd say. But
certainly. Yeah,
he uh he just really just glimmers that delivery, and I really enjoyed it. I really liked how he uh there was some of his sort of PTSD for this version of Poirot. I don't know if it's in the books, but has lots of wartime PTSD, which explains the big moustache through scarring. And that was a theme in this, and I thought that was done really, really well. Everyone was shot brilliantly, and the cast did really well. I thought Michelle Yeoh was good. Tina Fey, I want to speak in that accent, which was developed for radio presentation, transatlantic radio presentation. So I'm not even sure if there's a region in America that actually speaks like that
no, it's
naturally,
a
but I really
constructed
hope there
accent.
is.
The
It would
Mid-Atlantic
be
accent.
lovely if, right, it would be lovely if everyone just spoke like that, because it is amazing. And she is amazing in this. And yeah, it maybe lost a bit of momentum towards the end, I think, but I really, really enjoyed it. Surprised how much I enjoyed it, and I found it very satisfying to watch as well, and kind of lovely at the end. It finds a really nice last 10 minutes, which kind of gives everyone a bit of personal resolution, and I thought it was just quite sweet at the end, which I wasn't expecting. So yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to watch the varied responses to this one because um, I could not, like, of all the people I know who've seen it, the only person I could reliably predict their response was going to be my wife, because she doesn't really like these films, and she doesn't really like Kenneth Branagh's version of Poirot, and she doesn't really like his direction, like, at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is fine. But like, people who I expect to like it have been like, no, it's terrible. And people who I've expected to dislike it have been like, no, this one's the best one he's made. And it's like, they're really interesting. I think technically speaking, it is easily the best one that he's made. It's the best looking one.
Yeah,
It's the
yeah,
best, I think it's the best directed one. I think
yeah,
everything
for
you're saying
sure.
about the cinematography choices, I think this film makes me wish he would maybe just do it like a horror movie, because he's so good at
Mm,
like making you
mm,
want your eyes to drift to the background with negative space and
yeah,
shadow,
yeah, yeah,
to
yeah,
see things that aren't there. And I feel like that is an underrated talent as a filmmaker.
definitely.
um I don't think you're wrong in terms of him being a bit hammy. The word I usually use to describe it is that it's very, his Poirot is very stagey. He's playing for the cheap seats. It's big. It's
Mm,
always big. It's always kind of
mm,
louder than it needs to be. But
mm,
I really like that about it. I really like that he's going for broke in every scene. I watch a lot of classic films, and I'm much more used to that sort of classic stagey style of acting than many people that I know.
yeah.
But I do legitimately love that it feels like a throwback to that style of acting and filmmaking.
Mm,
this character in particular. Um, but also, like, Hercule Poirot is not just a good detective; he's a goddamn superhero in these movies. Like, he is shot and
mm,
portrayed as a superhero, as having superhuman abilities compared to the average man or
mm,
woman. And I think it's really interesting to see that blend of like old school stagey acting and like very contemporary, like we should be in awe of this person because he's a superhero.
mm,
It's an interesting meld of two things. I think
mm.
again, I think for me, I think Orient Express is probably still my favorite of the three, but I like all three of them. And again, that's probably just bias because again, Orient Express is one of, if not my favorite, Agatha Christie story.
Right.
Um, but
I think
again, like
tonally.
as
Sorry,
you say,
go
like
ahead.
again, like I think that maybe I think that that one is also beautifully shot. I think that one has a lot of really. I think that one makes a really good use of the train environment, the way that the camera moves through the train. Especially, there's a couple of really early, really long takes.
Mm,
That's the one thing I would say this one was maybe missing. There was a in in Orient Express and Nile, there's a couple of really well executed, super long takes. And this one
mm,
doesn't not have long takes, but there wasn't like anyone where I was like, holy shit, like how did this
mm,
must have taken so much? This one didn't have that, but it made up
mm,
for it by having much more, generally speaking, much more interesting cinematography and lighting choices and tonal choices as well.
yeah.
So,
Is
sorry, you were
it
going to ask.
very, very? Yeah, no, I find it very interesting that each of these feels like, especially this one, feels a very intentional shift in style. Like the Nile, I thought was shot pretty badly actually, and then Orient Express, what I've seen of it, had a much more classic film, not noir, but kind of a classic approach. And this is definitely, as you said, it's a much more of a horror movie approach. And he clearly knows his stuff. Like, he's been around a long time. He's been involved in a lot of different things. So he clearly knows how to create a certain ambiance. And maybe this is his successful one. Another one in this style would be great. But then again, maybe just keep letting him make what he wants. Like, if one out of every three is gonna be this good, then just keep making them. They can't be that expensive to make
No, I mean
comparatively.
by today's standards, I think 60 million is a pretty modest budget, and
Yeah, and
it's
he's got the contacts.
he's got the content, and also he's Kenneth Branagh. Like,
Yeah.
if he made one of these, like if every like, I don't want to like dictate the cadence of this man's work or anything, but like if he did like, you know, um, if he did like a Tenet and a Belfast for every one of these, I would be a happy person. You know, like if he just like went out,
Mm,
if he just, I just want him to keep making them. That's all I'm saying. I want him to keep making
mm,
Agatha Christie stories because I think
mm,
they're really interesting, and I think they're all classics for a reason. And I think that
mm,
I also just think that this style of filmmaking is one that we just don't get anymore, and I really appreciate it. Right? Like you don't
mm,
really get the. It's like this and Ryan Johnson are the only two guys who are doing the like put a bunch of people in a room and have one of them die and then have everyone else like act for the cheap seats. Like, and I
mm,
say that like that can be a complaint, but I don't say it as a complaint. I really like that style of acting. I really like everyone in this film, and
mm,
I like the big dramatic reveals, and I love how flamboyant this version of Poirot is. I actually would say that David Suchet played him for like 25 years or whatever. Is definitely the
mm,
most famous Poirot, but I think I like this version better. Um,
mm.
because David Suchet's Poirot would be like, well, I am the best detective, whereas
Yeah,
Kenneth Branagh's version is like, I am Hercule Poirot, and I am
yeah.
probably the best detective in the entire world. It's
I
just,
think
I don't
I
know why
think
he's
you've.
German in my accent and not French, but you get the
Is he
point.
Belgian?
He's Belgian in those stories, yeah.
So I think it's an interesting point because you've got Suchet acting for BBC serialized TV, and you've got Branagh acting from movies, and I think that's a very important distinction. And I certainly enjoy the Branagh's extra bit of life. I found Suchet Poirot a little bit staid, bit boring, but I mean, Branagh's never boring,
Yeah.
good or bad. He's never ever boring. So if it lands, it really lands.
I mean, I'm also the guy who thinks that like, what's the name of you've read all the Harry Potter film books and to your kids, and you've seen all the movies way more recently than I have because I haven't seen them
Mhm.
since they were new. But doesn't he play the like dark arts professor who turns out to be a total fraud? And he's like this
Yeah,
really flamboyant and like I also love that. You know, I
yeah.
love he's
Oh,
like
he's great. I mean, it's perfect.
he's the best at that kind. He's one of the best at that kind of character. And Poirot is that kind of character, except he's not
Yeah,
actually a fraud. You know,
yeah,
he's really is he's
absolutely.
the real deal.
Yeah, media superstar who is hammy and over the top, and turns out to be a fraud is like perfect Branagh. But that's, I mean, he's very very good at that. But like going back to Tennant as well, and there's another movie Dunkirk as well.
Hmm.
He's really like he has the range. I think he just chooses to be hammy, and you've got to respect that at some point.
Yeah.
That's his decision at certain points.
Although there is a really lovely moment at the beginning of A Haunting in Venice that is a throwback. It's a callback to Orient Express, where he's being served breakfast and it's two eggs and they're different sizes. And there's a whole thing at the beginning of Orient Express where they keep bringing him two eggs and he keeps measuring them. And when they're not exactly the same, he's like, sends them back. Um, and in this one, they give him two eggs that literally couldn't be more different. And there's this look on his face when they're in front of him that is like, no, I have chosen this. You know, I need to move on. I'm, you know, like, and I think there's a number of moments in this film like that where you can tell he's really his like internal
Mhm.
uh character work is super impressive. So
Yeah.
I think that we're going to remember the big flamboyant moments, but this film has the smaller
Mm.
ones too. Like it
It
really
does.
does
Yeah,
showcase his range.
absolutely. That's a very good summary.
Yeah.
Completely. So, how many stars? We could just carry on talking about this movie, couldn't we? I think we both really liked it. But how much did you like it in the star value?
Uh, so
Quantify your love for arts.
so for me, having only seen it the one time, for now, I'm going to give it 3 stars. Um,
Oh,
I would also say that I would be willing to bet when I watch it again because I definitely will. I bet it'll go up to 4 for me.
I've been ping ponging back between 3 and 4 stars since I finished watching it. I kind of wish the end had been a bit tighter. You know, just it kind of ran out of steam a little bit. But screw it, 4 stars. It's technically fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Full
I would
stars
say
for me.
also like the last scene where he's like got his mojo back, and that's exemplified by him like interacting with this person he's been brushing off. Um,
Oh,
like I love
yeah,
that
no, no,
last scene as well.
yes, yes, very much.
So yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
the scene from the I don't want to actually I don't want to talk about it, but the last bit where he kind of leaves the house is lovely. It's I feel like the final moment where everything comes together for him, that big final monologue, kind of didn't. I think that could have been bit more pointed. It's a very difficult thing to film a monologue though, with a crew of with a cast of people just looking at you. So I don't know,
yeah,
but yeah,
I would also
I'm just
say that of the three mysteries that he's solved so far, this one is by far the most straightforward. But also
yes.
to go back to a point you made before, and that like it does all logically fit together.
Hmm.
However, it's also the first of the three that doesn't necessarily give you everything you need to solve it ahead of time. Like
Hmm.
like Orient Express, if you pay attention to the things that people are saying, you can sort of put together like what's going on ahead of time. Maybe not
Hmm.
entirely, but you can sort of get that like it's not what you think it is. And this one hinges on a piece of information that I just like it hinges on a piece of horticultural knowledge that I just don't have. And this is the
Yeah.
first one of the three that like I would say that does that. And once he explains it, you're like, aha, this is a piece of context I didn't have. Um, and I'm never one to be like I want to figure it out first, but I do want to be able to figure it out. And I would say that that one piece of knowledge maybe is what drops it down for me at this point. Um,
Oh, interesting point. Right, I see. Yeah.
but again, like now that I have that piece of knowledge, I'm sure I'll watch this again in like a month's time or early next year and be like, actually, this is great. This is definitely 4 stars the second time through. You know,
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
in the same way that like I think it's interesting because there's pieces of knowledge like that in Death on the Nile that I definitely just already have that I'm sure other people just don't. Like the way that lipstick decays in water and stuff. Maybe I just picked up from other mystery stories.
Right,
Um,
right. Should watch
uh,
that too.
I mean, yeah, Death on the Nile is a tough one. We could do a whole podcast about that. But anyway, the point is that like it's good, and I expect to like it more each time I
Mm.
watch it. In the same way that I have very much liked Orient Express more each time I have watched it.
Mm.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, I should do that. Okay,
well,
well, we should move on from talking about this lovely film.
we should definitely move on as we're gonna definitely go over time. So we are gonna talk about a new movie that just came out on Disney Plus this weekend. And since I talked about Death or Haunting in Venice, why don't you
Oh,
give us the
thanks.
lowdown? Why don't you give us the lowdown on the new Disney
Uh,
Plus release, Quiz Lady?
well, Awkwafina plays Anne. Um, okay. And she is.
I had to
Um,
mute myself because I was laughing so hard it made me cough.
she's like an accountant or something, and she has she's not got the most interesting life, but she gets a lot of love from two things: her dog, and every night she watches a quiz show hosted by Will Ferrell, and she watches it as an escape when she's young. We see some flashbacks with her and her older sister, and her parents are arguing, and she sees it. It's her escape, and she's watched it every night of her life from young to now. And this is the kind of rather old fashioned quiz show that's one of those shows that's been going for years and years and years and years. And Matt made a point that Will Ferrell is clearly the and then he said a name which I can't tell you because I don't remember, but he will tell you, and it's that kind of guy.
He's just he's it's interesting. The one
He's
thing
the
I'll say
possessor.
about this film before we get into actually talking about it is that I'm legitimately shocked that it's not just, and I get it's because Alex Trebek has passed away, but it's kind of shocking it's not just Jeopardy.
Yes. Maybe they couldn't for rights reasons, but it is that kind of. Or Will Ferrell's lovely in this actually as this Alex Trebek kind of presenter. Aquafina's completely obsessed with the show, and because she's watched it every night of her life, she has this incredible knowledge of general facts, and so it shows her being able to list out the answers to all these questions, um, often beating the most of the contestants, apart from this one guy that she really hates, who's this like repeated winner, played brilliantly by Jason Schwartzman, who is just having the time of his life in this role. She's got an older sister who is kind of flaky and wants to be in lots of different things, and they're very very different. And through a hilarious set of circumstances involving their mother, they come together and they find themselves in need of money. And so Sandra Oh, who I think is brilliant in this film, and I've never seen her act like this as a really kind of ditzy, flaky actress wannabe, uses her social powers to get her very socially awkward sister in on this quiz. And you can probably guess the entirety of the rest of this film from that synopsis. Like exactly what you think is going to happen happens in this film. Um,
I mean, let me just cut
and
in and say that like you can't probably guess. You can
yes,
you have seen this movie before.
and
Let's just leave it there.
it's a comedy. And imagine if it had been written by someone who knew how to write comedy. Just imagine that. That's my take on this film. It's the I love the cast, but the jokes don't land for me. The comedy doesn't work. We talked at the top of this episode about the importance of editing in and out of improv comedy, and sometimes things like The Office and Bottoms, which we talked about last week, brilliantly gets it right. This gets it very wrong, and it just left me at the end of this movie when it finished, when exactly what I knew would happen happened. I was just kind of glad it was over, because it was kind of like pulling teeth, especially when you've got a brief appearance by Tony Hale, but Tony Hale, who is brilliant at creating comedy and a master at knowing when to let the joke go. Or I see. I don't know. This movie didn't land at all for me. I was kind of disappointed by it, because I really wanted to see it, and I really liked the two leads. In fact, I liked everyone. I thought everyone was great, and it was just really uninspired. It wasn't written well. It was kind of overbearing when it tried to be funny. There's a couple of really great lines that kind of makes you realize how it could have been great all the way through. It just needed a punch-up pass on the script, and it needed someone editing in and out of the jokes far more aggressively.
Yeah, I'm gonna go in a slightly different direction and say that, like, I think I mean, I don't know how tightly scripted this film was, but it definitely feels like it to me. And I have exactly no inside information on this, but it feels very much like other films from that sort of like Paul Feig, Melissa McCarthy type group of people who do a ton of improv, like just a ton of on-set improv. And Will Ferrell's whole group is definitely guilty of this as well, and they've had, I would say, more successes than failures, but they've definitely had their failures, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like there's a reason there's a whole other cut. There's a whole other version of Anchorman where literally every joke is different because they had so much improv B-roll.
They made a
Anyway,
whole sequel from it,
almost,
like
yeah, like that.
the straight to DVD. I forgot what it was called, but they released a feature length just with the offcuts of Anchorman.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And
Mm-hmm,
like there's three cuts of Anchorman, one of which is a drama, which is interesting. Or not,
mm-hmm,
maybe not a drama, but definitely like a whole different movie with a whole different narrative. What I'm trying to say is that, like, if you're gonna do on-set improv, you kind of got to find it and then do it, right? Like, I think a really great example of a great way to do improv is actually, I'm sure you've probably seen the Lemony Snicket movie that Jim Carrey did.
oh god, maybe, I think so.
Um,
Yeah.
so for that movie, he improved a lot in rehearsals, and
Mm,
then they used the best stuff to make the movie. And
mm,
I think in the case of something like Anchorman, where you have like four guys at the literal top of their game, and then someone who says, "Okay, these are the best jokes," and I
mm,
feel like this movie just falls into that trap of something like, say, I know a lot of people love this movie, but Jim Carrey's The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, which is they
mm,
just let him run wild with no editing, and it just feels flabby and lazy,
mm.
and so I'll go so far as to say I think I liked it more than you. I did laugh a number of times at a number of the lines, and but ultimately for me, the reason that I think I like it more isn't that it's funny, it's that the heartfelt stuff, like the clear underdog winning at the thing she's good at part of the story that you have definitely seen a million times before, I thought was really well executed. And there's one scene in particular where, like, on the quiz show, they have to play charades, and the two sisters play charades. I found that really kind of touching. um,
Mm,
and then Will Ferrell's character not being totally over the top, being very understated and very sweet throughout, even when he's not directly involved in the narrative. Um, I found, so basically what I'm saying is that, like, the last 20 minutes kind of saved it. Like the last 20-30 minutes kind of saved it for me. But only so far as that I think it's fine. That's fine. It's totally fine. There's definitely a million worse things on Disney Plus alone you could put on than this if you were gonna try to find something to watch on like a Wednesday night. Um, but you're right; it's not particularly good. It's just also not bad. It's fine. It's kind of falls in that alternate death knell of films, in that it is totally fine.
Mm,
The worst place for a film to land is to
really.
be not bad, but not good, like to be just uninteresting. Um,
I, I think it stings a little extra here because I think there was a lot of potential here for it to be really, really, really good. Like it's not that far away from being excellent. I think there's an extra storyline in it that is completely unnecessary that they should have torn out completely, and it would have been a better film just to be about the lady going to the quiz. I don't think it needed the extra motivation in there. I love the scene where Anne, sorry, meets Will Ferrell sort of just as they're about to do the show in his hall of bow ties. And
yeah, that scene alone, I
that
think.
was really lovely. I thought it was great.
Yeah. So my point here is that I don't think it's a particularly inspired film, but I think that there's a few scenes like that one that make it worth watching.
Hmm.
And I think that what he says to her in that scene, and I don't really want to spoil it, but what he says to her about, why are you here, and think about the reasons why you're here, um, and about like going through the experience with a little more in like mindfulness uh,
Mm,
about the experience, I think is really interesting and important and lovely. And I think that those scenes make the film worth watching. But I will
mm.
probably never watch it again. And
Yeah, see,
right? Like
yeah, that's got to figure somewhere.
it's totally fine. It's adequate. Yeah, it's adequate. Adequate to the task. That's my review.
Yeah, I've seen too many good comedies recently for me to give this as a pass.
Hmm.
I've seen what's Joyride was great. Bottoms was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
There's another one I've seen recently, and this just didn't land for me at all, which is a real shame because I really like the idea, I like the cast, and it had some lovely, meaningful moments, but it just didn't land for me at all. Just so I was so happy when it was done. I didn't want to watch another second of it.
Hmm.
So I think for me, star wise, I think I'm going 2 stars on this. Really, and it's not a 1 star movie, but I would never give it more than two. I'm never ever going to watch it again.
I think for me, it is only just barely a 3. Like just
Mm.
hanging on by like if it had if I laughed one fewer times, maybe like
Mm,
it's fine. I think there's probably people who will connect with it, and I think it's fine. It's fine. I really wish it was better, but it's fine.
yeah, yeah, me too.
Like I think if it was a 2-star movie, I would have more to say because I would have more. Like it's
That's
just
what I
not.
do.
It's not bad, and it's not great, and it's not interestingly either of those things. Is sort of the problem. It's just fine, and maybe that's worse. I don't know. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm sure that at some point I'll come home and my wife will be watching it. And I'll be like, "Oh yeah, this movie," and I'll enjoy the last half hour again, and that'll be fine.
Yeah.
Um, like if I do end up watching it again, I don't regret having watched it. I doubt I will regret catching it, some other time down the road. But I don't think I'm ever going to choose to watch it again.
Yeah, yeah.
So, with all that in mind, again, I think it's just ever so barely uh, a 3.
That's an interesting thing, isn't it? I would never choose to watch this movie ever again. 3 stars. Like I feel like that should lose a star by definition.
Hmm.
But that shows the ridiculous nature of any kind of movie rating system. Like how do you justify any of it? But no, I think watch your willingness to rewatch something
Well,
is
again, like
important.
it's very. I doubt that I will ever put it on, but I live in a house with other people, with another person, and it's the type of thing she will almost certainly rewatch, and when
Uh
she
huh.
does, I'll be fine with it.
Right. That's fair.
Right, and she liked it more than I did, and I liked it more than you did, and that's fine.
Oh, does she?
Um,
Okay.
yeah, she thought it was super cute. and I don't
Oh,
100%. I don't disagree with that exactly,
yeah.
but it worked better for her than it did for me.
Oh,
And
that's good.
and again, like when she eventually watches it again, I will sit down and be like, oh yeah, I'll watch this again. Like so, like just because I'm not probably ever going to choose to watch it again doesn't mean I'm never going to see it again, and it also doesn't mean that I'm
Mhm.
not going to enjoy the parts that I enjoyed. So,
Yes.
but I'm also like part of that too is that like especially lately, like this whole year, especially I have been very much choosing like when it comes down to should I watch a new thing, something I haven't seen before, or something I know I'm going to enjoy. I'm very much
Hmm.
leaning towards let's watch something I haven't seen before. So
Hmm.
that's another part of it as well.
Hmm. It's fair. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Good. Well, should we wrap it there? We've just hit an hour.
Yes, we should. We should wrap it up there. So if you've been listening this whole time, thank you so much. We appreciate you. This has been our show. If you'd like to support us, once again, we do have a Patreon. You can find it in the show notes. It's patreon.com/mcsimpson. That will very directly help us keep the lights on here at Awesome Friday HQ. But also share the podcast, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, give us a 5-star review. We're on whatever platform you're listening to and all of the other ones as well. If you could help us out and get us in front of more earballs, we would be very much appreciative. If you'd like to follow us individually, you can find my Simon's homepage is temporarypen.com and mine is stretched.ca, and you can find all of our recent work and all of our social links there. There are way too many of them now, so that's where you'll find them. And also, this episode will have a homepage, a home post on awesomefriday.ca where you will find JustWatch-powered streaming links that if you use those to watch, you use them to click on them, it'll take you to where you can watch the film or rent it or buy it. And if you do those things, that will also help us keep the lights on. So please go ahead and do that too. That link will also be in the show notes. We are also here in Vancouver on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations, which someone complained to me about this acknowledgement, and I'm just going to say it's important to acknowledge these things. And I'm going to keep doing it. So if that's not your thing, tough. I don't like it's an important step. It's a minimal step. I'll grant you that much, but it is still a step, and it is worth taking. Building awareness is never not worth doing. But that is the end of the show. And one last time, thank you so much for listening to us on this awesome Friday.
Thanks. Bye.